All right. Again, Jorge Cuadros. I'm your commanding officer since last July. So I'm coming up on a year, believe it or not. I've been in the Navy for 30 years. I did 5.5 years enlisted and the rest commissioned. I know you're doing the math. I got a lot of engineers, so I too got in on a waiver. I was like 12 when I joined. Not really. By the way, the jokes, kind of helped me get, settled down. I'm nervous, right? So if I stumble, I'm going to ask Master Chief, Bab to come up here and help me out with what we got to say. But we're also honored to have Master Chief Bab, the Master Chief for NAVFAC Atlantic, visiting us these days. So Master Chief, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so a couple messages. So, usually I like to start big to small. So I'm going to start with kind of what's going on in Big Navy. When we talk about Big Navy, we're talking Secretariat, on down, 5-sided building. What's the thinking these days in the Pentagon and in DC? So you may hear a term change, not necessarily a strategy, but a name, term or phrase change from great power competition to a strategic competition. I won't be able to explain to you the science. All I know is, just the strategic change in our, not strategy, but our terminology. So I want to expose you to that because it is new, and if you hear it, it's kind of like the same, but with the current administration tone. So keep that in mind. Also, a word that a phrase that we also quoted from one of the main publications. I think this one, VCNO, strengthen our enduring advantages to allow us to prevail in strategic competition with China and any other nation. A lot of emphasis on China, and I think that probably is no surprise to you. But China is one of our big competitors. From many standpoints, to include the pace at which their armed forces are growing, to include their Navy, and how we offset that with our own growth, with our own strength across the entire spectrum of warfighting, right? So just keep that in mind. That continues to be a very, very important center as we talk about everything Navy, to include the competition for funding, which is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. The Vice Chief of Naval Operations talked to us last October. Jeff Killian and I attended the leadership board for NAVFAC, and he took Vice CNO, very busy guy, right? And he took 2 hours to spend with NAVFAC to talk to us about his philosophy. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in the next slide, but in essence, he is challenging all of us to change our paradigm to one of, doing things, kind of the normal way to a way in which incorporates best practices, right? And best practices that are achieved through a number of ways. Again, I'll go through a little bit of that in the next slide, but even at that, I'm not going to read the entire slide, because the importance is for you to understand that we need to be a little bit more thorough in our process and see how we can apply lessons learned immediately, so we're a learning organization constantly. Also, in the last couple of weeks, I'm going to struggle with this mic, so maybe I should stand here, only here. The Secretary of the Navy acting, Mr. Harker, put out guidance. It's like a 3-page document, 2.5-page document. But it's very interesting that there were like 2 paragraphs that affect the shore very, very directly. And one that affects us most directly is that 4th bullet there, which is to develop a 10-year infrastructure plan, similar to something the Marine Corps embarked upon, I want to say 5 to 7 years ago. And it was a gradual reduction in their facilities to an end state, right? For us, for the Navy, this directive from SECNAV means we're reducing our footprint based on a square footage unit of measure by 1% for the next 10 years to achieve a 10% reduction in footprint, right? So this is important. It's fresh off the press, so I can't tell you what that is right now. I know this base, Naval Air Station Jacksonville, has gone into some detail of planning into it, and you know, I think everything's on the table right now, right? So one of the key messages that I'll pass on today is that, and I mentioned it already once, is competition for funding. Because China is such a prevalent topic, and you know, our ability to meet any threat from China or any other competitor is going to remain there and draw funding from big Navy, the shore is going to suffer, right? And so what we're talking about today is affordability. So for any base, what can we afford? And so when you think about, you know, things like that, you know, I'm going to give you an example of this facility, right? All bases have them, but they're occupied only 1-2 days a week and for a short period of time, right? And I don't know, I mean, obviously it's cool enough today, right? But do we keep it this cool every day? And is that, you know, the right, you know, the right use for the funding that we have? So, you know, and for every one of the targets of opportunity that we identify, there's going to be a constituency that says you can't do that, right? So I'm sure it's going to be a, you know, at least one group of people that says, you know, you can't touch chapels, right? But we might. And so what I'm trying to leave you with is everything's on the table. And again, Naval Air Station Jacksonville did some planning, and you know, just within these 4 blocks that I can see, there's at least 2 or 3 facilities that are on that list. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but that's the level of you know, thinking that we're going to ask every base to invest in and embark upon to get to that 10% we're talking about. Because 10% is a lot, right? You know, when you think about 10% discount on anything we buy, that's significant, right? So 10%, imagine 10% of the footprint of this base no longer there in 10 years. So that's very significant. And at the end of the day, as I said before, it's all about affordability, right? So we can't get rid of the runway, we can't get rid of the hangars, and if anything, we need to repair the runway, we need more hangars, we need more apron space for parking. So those are needs. So what do we not need that we can get rid of? So very significant issue, and I spent a little bit of time with you explaining because it is that significant and important. And the next topic is over the horizon. So I talked about this today, you know, more financial changes, organizational changes, and a focus on improving command performance. Some, you know, kind of catchy phrases there. OODA loop you've heard about before, the CADA card, and embracing the red, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. But the bottom line is, you know, we are not exempt from this competition for funding. I think everybody's been subject to, you know, some extent to the changes that we've experienced in the financial system alone. And when you couple that with reduced funding overall, reduced mission funding, it makes up for a very, very dynamic couple of years past and probably into the future. So, okay, next slide is the VCNO best practices, leader-driven performance. So what you can see there on the slide, I don't know how well you can read it, but you know, the left side tells you, you know, it's just kind of the traditional way of thinking. So our traditional way of thinking is that of, you know, hey, we're going to fix our own problems, right? When the chief was here, I told him, like, I personally confess, I said, you know, I'm the type of person that likes to brag about the good, right? And all the good things that we do. You know, I like to brag about all the great things that you do, right? That's, you know, if I can do one thing right during my 2 years here, is brag about all the great things that you do. That's in my DNA, that's in my nature, that's just how I'm hardwired, right? So for me to now flip into the right side, embrace the red and disclose all the things that are just not that great, it takes extra effort, right? But I know that to be better, to get better, I'm gonna have to do that. And I'm gonna ask you to do that, right? So I've spent a lot of time in the field. I was a before, a Fiat director before. So, you know, construction is kind of like what I've done the most of within NAVFAC. I wonder how many times, you know, our field people get together, huddle, and whenever something goes wrong, like, you know, say we miss a BOD, miss an award date or something, we huddle and we say, okay, what happened? what just happened here, right? What's the, and not non-attributional, benign environment, but let's criticize ourselves, right? Let's be our best and worst critics. I don't know how often that happens, but my aspiration is that happens more often than it has in the past, because that's how we need to. That's how we get better. I mean, I truly think it's through failure that we get better. If we succeed at everything we do, well, great. But when we fail, we don't know what to do. So I think, embracing the red kind of means that to me is, hey, when we're human, we're going to miss a mark from time to time. We'll aspire not to, but when we do, let's figure out what happened, right? And it doesn't matter if, hey, I screwed up. That thing sat on my desk for 2 months, 2 weeks, 2 days, and it was 2 months, 2 weeks, 2 days, too much, right? If that's the reason, it's a lesson learned. But if there's something else, then I think that's what we need to capture, and I think it's very important that we do that. So that's just an example of how we move from traditional to the best practices, right? There's many other messages there, and again, I think this slide has circulated enough, but I ask you to just read it. There's stuff there. I was reading an article this morning about metrics and key performance indicators, and this particular article was talking about, I guess the largest brewer in the world is Anheuser-Busch, which owns one out of every 4 beers that is served is owned by Anheuser-Busch, so that's a pretty big deal. So, but they used for the last year and a half, right? A company that's for profit has been using output metrics to predict what's going to happen, right? So what's our market of opportunity in the future, when that thing's going to open here, there, et cetera. And I found it very interesting that they were able to predict the spike that India suffered in the last couple months in COVID numbers. And when I say predict, they predicted it like 4 months ago, right? So that, I think that's phenomenal, right? And they have teams of people that are just dedicated to that, to the analytics portion of the business, and that's how they're coping and still making a profit, right? So we're a non-for-profit business, but I think we can get better at looking at signs, rating metrics, and predict what's going to happen, because that's going to largely drive what we do. So output metrics and forecasting performance. Fixing or elevating, right? So I'm also talking to my business line leaders, my ESG, my public works officers, and asking them to, hey, if you can't fix it, don't let it fester, elevate it, right? It's the same thing we're doing. We sent a CCIR last night in which we were asking our hire to help us with this particular company we're having an issue with, where we feel we've exhausted, all our options at the command level, and we're asking S3 and possibly S2 to engage, okay? So I think that's what's meant by fix and elevate. And again, relentless over-communication, you've heard that before. I'm gonna talk about that during the DEOCS piece. Collaborative problem solving, and one key element in this also in the best practices approach is an accountable person, right? So who is accountable for what outcome? I'm not sure that we do that every time, right? I know at the command level, when everything goes wrong, there's one person to blame at the end, and that's me, right? Because I'm wearing this pin, and I'm okay with that. But I think for every other subculture, we need to have an accountable person, and so that's another key element of this. And I think you're going to hear more and more of that. I already started hearing that from our hire, when we talk about an issue or a problem, and people, asking, okay, who was the person in charge of that output? So, anyways, we'll leave this slide. Probably talk more than I want to. I can talk to you hours about this stuff because it is that fascinating. So, I just ask you to embrace it like you should embrace the red as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, DEOCS. I'm not going to over-explain what DEOCS is. I think you've completed many of those. Al, do you want to explain DEOCS? No, he doesn't, no. It's something we are bound to do. So typically we do DEOCS shortly after change of command, and then yearly thereafter, right? So we would have done a DEOCS around the August, September timeframe this year had we not had a change in the process, right? So anyways, this is kind of what drives it. And then in early this year, the Department of Defense asked all commands to conduct the DEOCS. So at that time we said, hey, we got one coming up in September. I don't want to be lynched by having over DEOCS saturation. So we made the decision and we asked our higher echelons if we could have this DEOCS, of course, comply with a mandate, right? Comply with a direction. If this DEOCS could also serve as a DEOCS for the first year on board, they said yes. So the good news is no more DEOCS for the rest of this year. And thank you for participating, right? So I think the next slide will show, okay, some of the changes. So this used to be managed by what's called the Department of Defense Equal Opportunity Institute or something like that. Did I screw that up, Al, or is that accurate somewhat? Okay. Now it's managed centrally by the Office of People Analytics. Also, DoD centric now, but I think more around the Beltway. Some of you experienced, if you've done DEOCS before, you experienced the change, right? So the questions, maybe a little bit different. Certainly from the command standpoint, I used to have a lot more leverage as to what to ask. I could actually write out complete sentences of questions that I wanted to ask you. I no longer have that opportunity, right? So what we have to do, starting with Al, he has many of questions listed, pre-populated. And we choose from those based on, how we gauge the command at the time and the culture, right? So that's different, and we've had to adapt to that. We conducted it in April, and 53% command participation, so that was great. And as I've done in the past, I read each and every one of them down to the last comment. So thank you for that. And let's move on now to the results. Okay, so key takeaways. A lot of people, very complimentary and thankful for the COVID response. So I appreciate that acknowledgement. I can tell you that nobody could have ever prepared us for that, right? But I think everyone at the command, whether it was you adapting to now a new work environment, working from home. Initially a little bit of confusion, and then, adapting through it. The one thing I have to say is we actually met mission, right? We did not skip a beat, and I think that's good news. The question that I have after that is, in terms of the last couple slides is, did we do it well? Did we do it world class? I haven't answered that yet. I think we lose a little bit when everybody's teleworking. But the good news is we met mission, right? So, and I'm very happy for that. And I'm very thankful for people's acknowledgement that the handling of the COVID pandemic was viewed as very good. Certainly, a lot of over-communication about the subject, and and my plea to you all throughout to keep safe, remain safe, and I think by and large we have done that. We did have very, very similar to the rest of the country, between a 10 and 15% positive cases across the command. So significant, but by and large, I think it all worked out okay. Teleworking efforts have worked very effectively. I agree. I think that was very well done by everyone. I know CIO played a big piece in that. So Andrea and the team, thanks for facilitating this. Again, nobody gave us any warning about this, so I think we did very well with that. Dignity and respect for professional behaviors that were exhibited command-wide. So thank you, right? So number one, because it's in my command philosophy, it's something I'm asking everyone to do. It's kind of intuitive, right? The golden rule. But from time to time, it takes one person to not do it to maybe create a cancer cell that could spread, right? So dignity and respect very high on my list, and I was very happy to see that on the DEOCS comments. NAVFAC Southeast viewed itself as having a good work-life balance. Kudos to you, right? Because you're the ones making it happen, right? And I think the pandemic, we didn't need any more issues with the pandemic, right? The last thing we could have done is to now insert, more stress on you by forcing you to, can you imagine trying to live the old telework instruction during the pandemic, right? The old instruction would say something like, you can't even look at your kids when you're working, right? So I was very thankful and happy that the DoD as a whole gave some allowances because the situation and the conditions were completely different. All right. We must continue efforts to improve communication at all levels. Yes. And I kind of touched on that during the VCNO slide. Communication is one of those things that can really, really decay if we don't take care of it. Communication does not take care of itself. It needs constant reinforcement and work. And so we work very hard to make sure that, from starting from me, through the ESG, through the public works officers, PWD leaders, that the word gets passed. I hate cameras like you would not believe. And when you put me in front of Jeff alone, with a camera, and I'm supposed to be talking to you all, it's really hard, right? But I work very hard at it, and I certainly don't claim to do it perfect. But because I believe passing that word is very important. So, and I ask you to do the same, right? So through the ESG, hopefully you've heard that I ask you all, especially if you're supervisors, to check in with your people. To make sure that they're well, make sure that everything's okay. Ask more than one question, right? Don't leave the question at how you doing, right? Because the natural answer is going to be good. Ask more. Ask a different a question in a different way, so that maybe you start a conversation that can lead to something else, right? So very important, and above all, just it's everybody's job. So, but I take it as my part to lead by example in that department. Training and recognition continue to be areas needing improvement. Yes. Again, we met mission when it comes to training, but I know we can do much better. And so one thing that I think it's an opportunity going forward is, hey, we broke the mold to a great extent in terms of training. We used to be limited by quotas. I think that expanded a little bit thanks to the pandemic, and the ability, or the paradigm changing and now accepting that not everyone needs to be in a classroom to receive training. I think that's something we need to capitalize on. So we'll continue doing that, and we'll use every dollar available to invest into training, right? And I make that emphasis because I take you back to the conversation about funding, which is we are going to be constrained in the future, but you have my commitment that we will take training, to heart, and the recognition that goes with it. Along those two lines, I go once again and say, if you're a supervisor, it's also your job to ensure that this is taking place, right? Especially the recognition. So we recognized Jake today with the CSAM. The length of the service, they happen, but I really encourage you all to let me know how we can recognize somebody, because I know there's a lot of great things going on. And trust me, I have no limit on the number of medals that I can issue or award, right? There's no limit. There's actually a time when we did, right? I think at some point, like some ridiculous, can only issue 14 NAMs a year. That's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard, but anyways, it did happen, right? It's limitless now, so please help me recognize those deserving. Okay, and then top areas to address. IT issues. We could spend the whole day here talking about all the challenges that we have in the IT world. Hardware. I know everyone deserves, a refresh every so often. Not everyone gets it. Understand that some of that stuff is out of our control. We're living by the larger contract that the Navy has with the contractor in turn. I think, is it Leidos now? Okay. Used to be HP at some point, and there's probably a handful of others in the life of NMCI, so we're constrained by that. But this is nothing that's foreign to us, right? Because we deal with contractors all the time, and we know that contractors miss stuff. right? We know that sometimes we struggle with contractors. That's the case with the NMCI contract. And so I ask you to understand, trust me that, there's not one new piece of equipment that we get that does not get issued, right? Whether that's a laptop or desktop or a phone, they work very hard to make sure that they're out here at the Corps or in the field. But I know it's a very sensitive issue, and that's why I want to take a little bit of time to talk about it. Reorganization, we've been subject to it. I've been subject to that for the last 30 years, right? Reorg. And I for whatever amount of time I have left in the Navy, I could bet a dollar that there's at least one more reorg in the works, right? So I think the key to reorgs is just to, number one, big to small, try to understand why things are happening, and then try to, to distill it to how it applies to us, right? Because if we worry too much about the stuff that's out of our control, then, we're never going to be able to kind of distill what is in our area of true concern. So I will be there along to help you with any future reorgs, but understand that, our job is really not going to change much at the end of the day. Recognition, we talked about that. New funding constraints, it is real, and if we have time, I can talk a little bit more about that. Material issues, I actually have good news in that department, right? So 1 October, we assume purchasing, if this is what I think that's what the comment referred to is material issues, class 4. October 1st, we'll kind of drive our destiny, right? So we will inherit the purchasing agents that are currently working for the Fleet and Fleet Logistics Center. They're going to be NAVFAC Southeast employees, so that's good news. In the past, if we had a material requirement, even the most urgent material requirement that went to FLC would receive a priority 7. That's the highest it would get, right? Because 1 through 6 were typically filled by ship parts, aircraft parts, submarine parts, and all those things that warfighters need. So now for us, starting in October 1st, a true priority 1 will be a priority for our purchasing agents. So I think that is good news, and I'm looking forward to that day and seeing the changes immediately happen. And then access to mentors, right? So we have a mentorship guide in the works. I think you may have seen a version of it. Mentorship is nothing new, right? So I think when I hear the word mentorship, again, I'm not trying to recite my life here, but for the last 30 years, I've seen different versions of mentorship, right? Forced mentorship. I can't remember what year, but I think those of us in uniform were told, you will get a mentor, and for the mentor says, you will mentor somebody, right? It's like, okay. That's a little bit, maybe a little bit over the top from my perspective. I think mentorship happens every day, but I think mentorship can also improve a little bit, right? So if we take it to heart, I think mentorship, works in a way, I find somebody that I trust, right? And we have a conversation, and maybe there's a connection there, and that person is willing to be mentored or to mentor me, and that's how it develops, right? And then it's through constant, checking in with each other that it truly produces good outcomes, right? The other thing with mentorship is it can't be fake, right? I think I was implied with what I said. You can't fake it. You can't say, I'm just going to mentor people because I will mentor people because I want to be a mentor. You may be the worst mentor in the world, right? And not ever have a mentoree. So just understand your limitations, and again, understand that Chad and I like him, he likes me, but maybe we just don't connect, and maybe I have nothing to offer, or maybe he feels like I have nothing to offer, or I feel like I'm not really producing any good outcomes there. At the end of the day, the other piece important for me on mentorship is you also need to dig deep and understand people's potential, right? And that needs to be clearly communicated in a good way, right? Especially for those people that may not see their true potential every day. You'll be amazed at the number of people that I've asked about, hey, what do you want to do next? and you know, I have something in mind already, and they tell me something that to me is below their capabilities, right? So that's an important conversation to have, because due to personalities or self-confidence or what have you, some people may not be aware of their potential. So I think that's an important element in the mentorship piece. But at the end of the day, it needs to be genuine, it needs to be from the heart, and it needs two people for it to work. So mentorship is big, and I truly concur with that. Okay, DEOCS way ahead. You've seen this before. You may have been part of the team. So Command Resiliency Team conducts a deep dive and makes recommendations to the CO. I'm getting that debrief actually on Thursday, I believe, and we'll go from there. Again, I've been reading the comments. You know, it's a volume about that big, so you know it makes up for good reading. So I you know, looking forward to the final upbrief. I discussed the you know, different outcomes as I make my way around the different PWDs. So you know, Al was very busy as I did some visits around the Texas installations and the Gulf Coast installations. You know, he pulled those first, and you know, kind of gave me the essence of it as I went around and discussed them. So we'll probably do a little bit more of that within the command, either via video or something like that. All right. Last, financial update and outlook. Okay. I think most people know this, right? So I talked about the change in financial systems. Everybody's aware of the phasing out of Navy Working Capital Fund. So that's history. As much as we would like to go back to it, it's just not coming back. So hopefully, you know, in a couple of years, you know, we'll say, what was that? Navy Working Capital, what? But maybe not. What I do know is that created chaos. There's really no other word to describe it from my perspective. Single BSO, and now, you know, everything mission funded with, you know, a piece of it being reimbursable. It's been hard. I can't really say too much about that. So starting in 20, you know, moving into 21 especially hard. I think we received FIPS, what was it, December of 20, right, for the fiscal year 21. So like 3 months into the fiscal year, we finally received FIPS. We've been going through billet mapping. You know, each and every one of you, your billet was looked at and found, you know, we found a fund source for it, right? And you know, many times we erred. So the visualization that I've been given to this is, a lot of people, have you seen a fiber line before? Have you ever seen a fiber line cut? Right, so, you know, a fiber line may be about that big, but if you cut it in half, and our CVs and NSPV7 did this, right, in Archon, remember? We were very popular that day. So we cut it, and inside there is thousands of little cables, right? So the analogy, the visualization I've given with billet mapping is, imagine cutting a fiber line in half and then splicing it, you know, cable by cable, you know, the right color of blue with the right color of blue, the right color of green. It's been monumental. I mean, the effort has been like you would not believe. And I know the people that have been involved with this because they've lived it every day. And we're on version 3.0 right now. We're probably gonna have a 4.0, is that right? Yeah, 9, yeah. Well, I didn't mention all the fractions, right? So there was 2.1 and 2.2. We've been at this the entire year. And hopefully that it was somewhat transparent to you. I don't think it was. But I hope that by and large, most of you were spared from the pain. And it was largely FM and BD that were dealing with this, but it's been a significant issue. And the reason why we were doing that, the reason why we had to splice that cable was because we needed to be affordable. Because I could not afford to screw up our available funding with people that we had. So you heard at some point of a hiring freeze. We did, until we were able to figure out exactly where we were on the financial side. We had to institute a hiring freeze. As we go around the different PWDs and as we discover, maybe more reimbursable or maybe, mission funded that gets realigned, we've been able to release some of those portions of hiring freeze. It's not blanket that we've lifted it, but it's been done, a little bit at a time. The other thing we did was to sacrifice many of our vacancies. And again, it's because we need to make sure that we are affordable. So in the eve of the fourth quarter of 21, I am now comfortable that we're going to be able to afford everybody that we have today and those that we had already chosen and opted to bring on board. So 21, I think we're going to be okay. 22, it's not going to be as painful, so we have a little bit of steady state, but it's still going to require very careful analysis, consideration, and almost a person by person, vacancy by vacancy, analysis. So I didn't know until I got here, and I probably wouldn't have found out unless we were in this business that we have about 12.5% attrition every year, right? So I found that to be high, but understandable, right? It's a very active market. Every one of you is, a professional, right? So every one of you can probably have, options in the private sector. Some of you, have served for many, many years, so some of you retire. So whether you move on to something else or you retire, our attrition rate is large. But that attrition has actually allowed us to as Jeff says, it control the valves, right? So that we know how much we can have on inflow based on the outflow that we have, while keeping in the horizon what our affordable number is. So during 22, we're still going to be talking about affordability. It's going to affect some fund sources. The ones that I know right now are going to be still strained is FP, and the other one is potentially TR. I think we can handle the rest. But those two, we're going to have to look at almost every day, right? And it affects many business lines, because FP is probably the sick that affects the most amount of people, right? So just bear with us. Understand that I can't worry too much about how much money we get, because I have no control over it. It starts at Big Navy, and that's why I mentioned China. Starts at Big Navy, and when you see the entire Navy budget, everybody starts chipping away at that, right? And when we say, war fighters are a priority, it is also for Big Navy, right? So that chips away at the top line, and then I won't say that we get the crumbles, but we are one of the lowest priorities, right? And the Navy is consciously taking risk on the shore so that we can support and remain competitive with other countries. Okay, so last bullet there talks about we expect to have billets and FIPS ready to go on or about 10 October for the FY22 effort. And I can't think of a better way to end for questions than with the financial outlook. So I will end though, once again saying I'm blessed every day that I come into work, because I know of the caliber of people I work with. I know not every one of my peers has it as good as I do. So I am very thankful for everything you do, and I'm honored, deeply honored to be your commanding officer. And today, as I said before, a very special day for me, because I get to not look at a camera the whole time, but look at many of you and see your reactions as I brought up some of the topics. So thanks for that, and we'll open up for questions. It's probably both. So the question is, when we talk about great power competition, what does that mean? Is it by country, or is it an idea? I think it's both, right? So I'll explain it my way, and with my experiences and my perspective. So I was born in another country. Probably a surprise to you all, right? You can't detect my accent. But I was born in Colombia, And I just look at the news today, right? A lot of unrest in the news, partly caused, I think, by the pandemic and partly, just due to policy. I think, I know many of you are aware of this, right? But I think when you are able to experience another culture, another, country, you realize that the United States of America is the greatest nation on earth from every standpoint, right? And I think the bigger one is the idea of and what we stand for. Why do we do an oath? I don't think that your peers in other countries, one day recite an oath or sign a piece of paper with that oath on at the top. So when we talk about the great power competition, from my standpoint, it is in part the ideals of democracy that the United States stands for, right? So, and I think many countries around the world try to emulate the United States because of what we stand for. But yes, sometimes then that becomes localized, right? Because sometimes we've seen it also. Not everyone shares a particular ideal, right? So there might be things that China, Russia, and the United States have in common. I can't think of one right now. I'm sure there are. But by and large, when we talk about the great power competition, that's what we talk about, right? Is those countries that attempt to be a peer competitor or near peer competitor to the United States, right? So that's I think my best answer to that. So I think it's both. Did I answer it? Okay. All right, what else? Yeah, so because it's out, right, and we've been able to share with the ESG. I can't remember. So I know so 24 years ago, when I first got commissioned, we were changing. You saw, public works centers. Everybody remember public works centers? Yeah, some of you do, right? So that was my first duty station, a public works center, San Diego. And I remember those guys were like the dirty, oily guys, turn wrenches, not very popular with customers. And then there was these things called divisions, right? The EFD. So, within San Diego, there's, Public Works Center San Diego, EFD Southwest. And those were the, white collar, looking good, Hollywood, everybody likes them. And then we slapped the two organizations together and within some years and became the FECS, right? And at that time, we also established, remember the radiator, the galactic radiator, right? Business lines and, support lines and how it works. And, it was confusing, I remember. And so we've been kind of living in that world of business lines for about that time. The chief, Admiral Korka, has now, again, through the years, evolved the idea that we do three things, especially, so aside from that, we've gone all through a self-identification process as we tried to fit within the Navy budget, right? We've gone back and defined, hey, what are we in place to do? What's policies say we should be doing, we as NAVFAC? What's our mission statement? What are our missions, functions, and tasks, MFTs? And based on that, develop, kind of three main courses of what we do. So he says we do sustainment, base sustainment, we do construction, and we do expeditionary. And oh, by the way, those three things, NAVFAC Southeast does every day, and we do it very well, right? And I make an emphasis on that because not every FEC has an expeditionary branch. So Don McConey, he lives that every day. And we do it well. So when we talk about the potential next reorg, and I'm very emphatic when I say potential, it's because it's not, it's not signed. It's a study, and it's kind of like concept right now, is reorganizing from S2 on down to S4 in a way that kind of fits those categories, right? So sustainment, construction, and expeditionary. The reason behind it is exactly what I mentioned before. It's better aligned with our mission, functions, and tasks. And so as we learn more, we'll share it with you. When I mentioned that, when you talk about sustainment, it's easy for us to, based on the traditional thinking, to say, well, that's public works, that's PW. It's also easy for us to say, when we talk about construction, well, that's DC, right? That's design and construction. And of course, expedition is kind of simple. So I'm asking, don't think the traditional way, right? Think differently, because that's not what we mean. What we mean is we're going to, this is how we're going to deliver products and services. So for sustainment, well, public works is going to have a part, AM is going to have a part, EV is going to have a part, and probably DC is going to have a part, right? For DC, for construction is going to be the same. DC is going to have a part, AM is going to have a part, and real estate may have a part, EV will have a part. So it's just that's kind of what it looks like today. But even as I explain it that way, there's a heck of a lot more to it. As we are cleared to share it, with the command, you will see it. Right now, even when I share it with the ESG, I knew that it was going to create anxiety, right? So we were very careful with which version we shared, because any change is hard, and any change, without the proper context and explanation, can lead people to become anxious or confused and frustrated, and et cetera, et cetera. So I know, I know that whenever I see a reorg, I look to see if my name's still on it, right? Because it's just natural, right? So with that said, there's a piece of it that is being talked about, which is, for example, for me, under this new concept, does it make sense for me to also be the regional engineer? That's a question that's not been answered, but it's a question that's floating out there. Do public works officers really belong in CNIC, or do they come back to NAVFAC, right? Remember public works officers were part of NAVFAC? Yeah, right? So I think everything's being looked at, and to kind of further expand on the question, it's frustrating for me that every 3 years, or every time we change a CNIC commander, the question comes up over and over and over again. Does NAVFAC really need to be in place? Do we really need NAVFAC? And so I think this current approach from the top down, right? So from establishing our mission, what's the policy? What are we in place to do? Why are we a SYSCOM? Why are we the oldest SYSCOM? What are our MFTs? Having gone through that process has really given NAVFAC the identity that it needs for that question to be just completely erased off of the script book of any CNIC commander, because it's stupid. Frankly, it's stupid. We are the oldest SYSCOM, and we are. Can you strike that out of the recording later? Okay. I forgot I was being filmed. But it's my opinion. We shouldn't be asking those questions, right? CNIC has a mission, and functions and tasks that are different from NAVFAC, right? People just confuse them, and that's why we live this eternal, question. So I think that's part of the reason for this current initiative to reorg. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that. Does your question allude to like virtual training or
virtual training, drone training, range training?
Yeah. So imagine a base with 10% of the less infrastructure in 10 years. Many things are going to change, and I mentioned it very briefly, and Andrea has heard me say this, right? So even if we go back to normal, don't take away Teams, right? Because that's a super powerful tool. And to the people that provide training, the other argument is, even if we go back to normal, even if we go back to classroom training. Hey, don't cut down the quotas because we've gone a long way to expand training using virtual environment to do that. I think the reduction in infrastructure is going to be a forcing function as well. But also with that will come a potential scenario where, let's just take the nice command conference room that we have in, what's our building, 903? Okay. You know, that may be available to other commands because it gets put on a pool of conference rooms as we reduce infrastructure as well. So I think a lot of things might change, maybe to that extent, and so we just need to be ready for it. But you know, to kind of focus and hone in on the positive, I think training is going to be one of those things that probably gets a boost. All right. Yeah.
Can I offer one thing? There's a document out there called the Naval Leadership Development Framework, and it talks specifically about training. And while it's more geared towards active duty personnel, there's an important part of that that talks about 10%, 20%, 70%. 10% of your training you can expect to be classroom training. 20% of your training you can expect to be online or some sort of ad hoc training. 70% of your training you can expect to be on-the-job training. And that's what I'd ask you to kind of think about as we go forward in training.
Okay, what else? Okay, I saw a number of you walking from, when I walked out, so I drove here, because we're going to lunch after. But when I left the building, I was like, I don't think anybody's going to be over there because all the cars are parked, you know, in the parking lot. But it's very nice to see everybody walking. It's a great day to walk, and you know, thank God that it gave us this weather today. So it's going to be slightly hotter as you walk back. So 101 days of summer. Pay attention and pace yourselves. But you know, again, thank you all for coming out. I hope this was helpful. You know, certainly don't let an opportunity like this ever go by if you have a burning question to ask, which is why we carve out the time for the questions and answers. If something pops in your head later on and you want to ask, you know, use the tool that we have. And you know, I'm mentioning that because also we're recording this and we're going to post it on something, Facebook, DVids. So if you think of something, use the CO suggestion box to ask it, or you know, ask it up your chain of command. Some people have been bold and emailed me directly. I don't take offense when that happens. But when that happens, I will ask down the chain of command if this question has been asked before, just because it's the right thing to do. But CO suggestion box, you know, I get those every day. They're answered, you know, by me. It's my authorship. You know, of course, some people help me, but you know, it's my authorship on the answer. So none of that ever goes without being addressed. Okay. Some questions, I will say, some questions sometimes borderline, you know, getting into PII, or things that are just, you know, better answered directly or somehow, especially when they're anonymous, just because of the nature of them. But I do read each and every one. Okay. Anything else, XO? BD? Senior Chiefs? All I have to? You good? Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.